Hey, so first of all, I read that article. I want to mention that I read that article you posted about wandering mind, and I'm glad that this information about consciousness studies, which is what that is that's the formal name for it, is becoming popularized. And I realize that it'll take a while before it has, if it has an effect on the majority population. So it was good, but it was a little bit childish in a way. In other words, they studied several thousand people and asked them questions throughout the day with an app, or they called them, or at different times during the day, and asked them how they were feeling and whether their mind was wandering, and they reported. Now, there's a couple of flaws to that. There's a couple of inconsistencies. Number one is that these people themselves that were part of the survey were not trained in any way for self-awareness. So their reporting the times of distraction or wandering mind was entirely inaccurate, inaccurate enough that it wasn't, that it skewed the results, that showed misrepresented the actual time that the mind is wandering aimlessly. Another point is the whole setup of the design of the design of the study was based on false premises, in the sense that, or false foundation, in the sense that in Western science traditionally, the subject or personal experience, the subject, can never be the object of any type of research. So personal experience, especially in psychology, my thoughts and experiences about my own mind can never be a valid object of scientific inquiry. That's the way all of our foundation of science is. It has to be able to be reproduced in the environment and tested objectively. In other words, there can't be any personal experience involved in that. It has to be entirely non-personal and objective and reproducible, usually in an artificial setting, a controlled setting. So we're coming to that's called logical positivism. It doesn't matter what it's called, but the whole point was that any type of inner experience was rejected as any source of valid scientific data. And that's changing now, especially with consciousness studies. The personal experience of consciousness and what it means to be conscious is the sine qua non. It's the most powerful source of this type of study, this type of scientific inquiry. So really, all those scientists had to do was look at themselves, learn a little bit before they did the study, learn a little bit about what it means to be self-aware, and then practice it for a couple of days or a week or 2 weeks, and then report through the process of observation, of self-observation, of one's own process of one's own thoughts, then report the frequency of the mind wandering. Because in fact, what you'll find, if you do it yourself, and you can do it yourself, we can all do this, is that the mind wanders probably more like at least 90% of the time. And it's only when we're faced with a challenging task or a difficult task that demands our concentration, or we have to make a decision, that we look at what's going on, look at the options, and look at different avenues of approach or opportunities to solve that situation. So then we focus. So that's maybe 10% of the day that you're forced to do that, and I'm being generous. When you really have to say, okay, this is what I'm doing now. Should I do A, B, or C? If I do A, it will turn out this way. But if I do B, there's some other variables involved. Am I looking at it the right way? Maybe I'm thinking wrong about this. Maybe I should shift my perspective or gain another perspective. That's what I'm talking about. That type of focus. That's mental clarity and mental focus, where you're absorbed in a task and you're not distracted. The rest of the time, the mind, let's say the 90%, it's an arbitrary figure, but it's close enough to be viable. The rest of the time, the mind is just seeking for distractions. And if there's no object around to be distracted by that I can latch onto, the mind can latch onto, no sensory stimulus that I can engage in, then the mind takes on this process of wandering. Just wandering from one, it's called discursive thinking, just from one thing to the other, and some association links it to another thought, and then random association, and that cluster of words as thoughts, because thoughts are only words. So some word or concept will trigger another tangential thought, and you just keep on going around and around all day that way. So it's flawed, and it's flawed also because the scientists didn't know what they were doing. They're amateurish. In other words, they just had to study their own mental processes. Well, first learn how to do that, because I'm pretty sure they are so identified with their thinking that they think their thinking is that they think they are their thinking. So most people, they don't separate themselves from their thinking because they think they are thinking. They experience themselves as that thought, as that stream of thought. This is me. All these thoughts are me. And there's no sense of separation from the thoughts. It's a complete identification. So, whereas someone trained will say, no, I can see the train of my thoughts. I can see my thoughts like a river flowing by, and I'm standing on the bank. Whereas the average person, 99% probably of the population, is in the river, is part of the river, is part of that flow. They believe themselves to be the river. Whereas someone who's trained in consciousness practice will learn to step out of the river and observe that stream of thought. So none of those people were qualified to give those results. That's why the result was only 40% where the mind was on her. It's all the time. You could say it's all the time. Unless those times I need to identify with a task. So let's tie that into learning. I want to tie that back into learning and intelligence, because consciousness is all about learning and intelligence. Accelerated type of learning, enhanced learning, and then enhanced intelligence. So I'll get into that in the next segment. All those scientists had to do is look at themselves and to see how much time they spend throughout the day when they're not engaged in their science, how much time they waste, how much energy is wasted with this random flow of thoughts. But they invalidated their own self. See, all you have to do is look at yourself, and you'll see how they would see, the scientists would see how feeble their own consciousness is. All right, I'll continue this. There's another part I want to talk about: emotion and learning.